Welcome all who are watching, wherever you might be in the world. And thank you. This is a particularly important episode of the Vedic Inquirer. We're joined today by Sapna Patel from the UK. Hey, Sapna, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
And this is about Sapna telling her story. She, in many ways, is the first test case of this new CPOC. They came in with all of this fanfare about due process. I think what you're about to hear, and particularly the impact it has on someone who, looks to the society for support as a victim of child abuse and so on, is truly shocking. And we think there's a bunch of questions that both the GBC and the CPOC should be answering. We don't think it's at all acceptable what's happened. And if there's an indication of what's coming in the future, it does not bode well. We're also joined by Sanika. Please greet everybody, Sanika. Who's up at the unholy hour, or should I say the holy hour of 4 a.m.
The holy hour, Brahma
in this
Muhurta
part
ki
of the
jai.
world. And we've
No,
been,
thank you for having me. Thank you, Damodar. Thank you, Sapna. I really, really appreciate your willingness and your courage because it takes a lot, and it's really important in the sense that, of course, this is very important to you and your story, but it's also it has an importance for the entire society. So I really appreciate what you're doing here. Thank you.
and we're also joined by a resident fact checker who cannot be seen. So there you go. Sapna, tell us a little bit about your history of involvement with the Krishna consciousness movement from, is it the late 80s, early 90s through to today? Just what is it? How are you connected? What is it that you do?
So two devotees came to my parents' house, oh my God, yeah, in the 80s. And yeah, gave my dad Science of Self-Realization, and it started from there. And in 88, we moved to Norbury, and then my mum and dad started doing service in Soho Temple once a week after they shut the shop and stuff. And obviously my cousin only lived a 5-minute drive away from us, so we were always together. But yeah, and then I finished uni and I stayed in Watford Temple doing service, making garlands, helping in the kitchen and stuff. And then life progressed and got married, had my daughter, got divorced, and now I'm with my other partner. But yeah, Krishna consciousness, we started at a very, very, very young age, me and my
And
family.
you've maintained your connection throughout.
Yes. I mean, I don't go to the temple as much as I used to now, since this whole thing. It's put me off going Soho for sure.
Yeah, understood. And of course, that's one of the things that when people get all sentimental, oh, the poor old abusers had all these restrictions, they actually forget about the impacts on the life of victims who might be re-traumatized just by running into the abuser and so on. Now, sometime in the early 90s, you experienced abuse. And we're not obviously prying to get the details, but there's one particular thing that I want to ask, even though it seems a little chronologically out of order. When you reported this, initially you reported it to the CPO. This was prior to the CPOC dismantling them and so on. And they adjudicated your case, and we'll come back and sort that. But for some reason, CPOC, they decided to also have a look at the case, and they characterized what happened as the adventures of teenagers, the curiosity of teenagers, as if you were two willing experimenters. That's not your experience at all. And how did it feel to you when you heard people who don't know you, hadn't heard the details, weren't even maybe across the details, but choosing to characterize this tragic event that happened in your life in that kind of casual, doesn't even need restrictions kind of way? Yeah. Anyway, I apologize even for asking the question, but I think it's important in the scheme of everything that we're going to look at here. What impact has it had on your life when you experience abuse? particularly as a young person. I think you were 16. How has that played out in the rest of your life? Yeah.
This is tougher than I thought.
No, I understand. And look, tell us if at any point it's too much, we can just stop.
The abuse, I'll tell you the history. The abuse started at a very young age, and it all started with him touching me in places and stuff. And because I was so young, I didn't know what was right and wrong. And then as I got older, I realized what he's doing is totally not acceptable, and it felt wrong. And that's when I said no. And that was probably at the age of 15. And this probably started when I was about 10, 11.
Right.
And then that's when I started playing up with my family and didn't want to go to their house and stuff because we used to go and see them every week. And it was just before my GCSE exam. And I literally refused. And my mum forced me to go because they were going to sit at someone's house because it was a funeral. And that's when I was raped at his house at 16.
I'm so sorry that you had to experience that.
Yeah, it was only years and years later. I didn't tell anyone. Then I spoke up at 18 and I told Temples at what had happened. Like I was in the Pandava Centre at that point, and all my friends supported me because I stayed with them as well to get away from where I was. And I went to a few of the Guru Maharajas to say my case, but nothing was done. So then I left it. And I told myself, get over it, just move on. And then I went to the police in 2021, I think, only because I found out he moved to Mayapur, and then he came back from Mayapur because he was banned for 2 years from Mayapur and I think and Vrindavan. One, because he had an affair, and two, he was inappropriate with a few women, like following them and stuff like that. And it was at that point when he came back to this country, and I thought, do you know what? You haven't changed. You haven't changed the slightest. You're still a pervert, perving on women. You walk around with your wooden shoes and your dhoti and acting all kind of high and mighty. And he was doing services, Soho Temple. He's always also helping people get married and stuff, like putting people together. So he was in quite a few different, doing different things. And that's when I thought, you know what, I'm going to the police, and I reported it to the police. And I was lucky enough that I got to court. The CPS did ask me for so much evidence and stuff and grilled me and got timelines and everything. I got my time in court. I lost. It's up to the jury. There's nothing I could do. But obviously I had help from the child protection team in Templer. That's when they found out what had happened. And then they obviously took on my case, looked into it, asked me for information, got information from me with my consent, shared whatever with him, I think, what needed to be shared. And then I got his responses back. But there was always consent, and they were always supportive and finding the facts. And obviously then they made their decision.
Yeah, thank you. And you said that you raised it with a few ISKCON leaders, and it sounds like not only did they not move it forward, but it doesn't sound like you got anything like the response that you expected or would have been fitting initially.
No, I don't want to name the Guru Maharaj that I did because he's passed away now, and I think that's not fair on him.
Yeah, but I can understand when at a time like that, when something painful's happened to you and you want to reach out to those who are guiding you spiritually and you see as spiritual shelters, it must be, just compounding the distress to not feel heard or believed or whatever, and to see nothing done. So you eventually went to court. I gather that it was a technicality, as in a court of law, because this often comes up in Vedic inquiry discussions. In a court of law, the standard of evidence is beyond reasonable doubt, which actually feels like a bit of a free kick at times to the defense lawyer, because all they then need to do is create a little bit of doubt. And I gather in
Yeah,
your
plant a
case,
seed of doubt.
a little bit of a memory on what was I wearing on that day 20 years ago was all that was needed for that scallywag scoundrel lawyer to prevail. All right, so you did eventually take it to the CPO that was, and they heard your case, as you say, they liaised, and they even came to an adjudication. What was the initial adjudication by the CPO? What was the initial finding in your case?
As in the outcome?
Yeah, the outcome of the very first CPO investigation.
They put restrictions in place.
Right, so they found a slightly different standard of evidence, preponderance of evidence, that more likely than not, this rape happened, and therefore this individual is a potential risk, a potential threat, and these restrictions should apply. Sanakaji.
And can I just add, and also,
Yeah.
I don't know the women in Mayapur. I was told this by someone, a very close friend of mine, and I found out what he had done to those 4 women, and I'd given that information to the child protection team, and they investigated it, and whatever I'd said matched up as well. And it wasn't only that, it was also about, I found out, and women had come forward to me from Soho Temple, that he had been inappropriate. Like, he brushes past women, he inappropriately touches them with their bead bag, he's always staring at them and stuff. And it was only after I went to the police, like years after this happened, I then realized also what abuse had happened to me, in the sense of when I used to go to the temple and stuff. When we were in classes, he always used to move so he could just stare at me, and then I'd move and then he would stare again, and he was just so creepy, and he's done that to so many women in this country as well. And this is why I wanted to voice all of this stuff, because a person like that, if you've been like that for so many years, you don't change. You don't change.
Well, and he's currently still at large, and potentially there's lots of other innocent parties that are at risk. So I think that's a very important point. Sanakaji?
Yes.
Sapna, I wanted to ask you, obviously, if you're comfortable answering, did you, was it a criminal court that you tried to, did you try to, you went for criminal charges?
Yes.
And
it's
if you want,
the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, that makes that decision of whether they feel they've got a case. Sorry, go back to you, Sanakaji.
okay, it wasn't your decision. And if you want to share, why was he found not guilty? Could you do you want to share exactly what happened?
There was 12 jurors, and obviously one or more found him not guilty, and that was it.
Or
I
is
needed all
enough?
12. I needed all 12 to say he was guilty.
So that's it. You
Yeah.
have to convince 12 jurors, and if
Yeah.
one says, well, I'm not 100% convinced, that's it. Wow.
I personally believe if it had just been no jurors and the judge, I really feel that he would have found guilty. He would have been found guilty, because the judge, when I was being grilled by his defense, she actually stood up for me, because they were really trying to ground me down. And I believe if it was just the judge, he would have been found guilty.
And I gather
sure.
aged rape cases and aged abuse cases are notoriously difficult to prove beyond reasonable doubt 20 odd years after the fact. So I don't think
Yes.
any of this reflects on the strength of the case. And
No, but
just again, underscoring, sorry, I'll just finish this point, just underscoring that that's a very high standard of evidence. And of course, they're imposing potentially custodial sentences. ISKCON's applying a different standard, similar to what might be applied in civil cases. There's no custodial threat. Restrictions doesn't seem to be a crime against humanity here. Sorry, back to you, Shanaka.
No, I think this is it's a really relevant point in the conversation of child protection in ISKCON, because essentially what CPOC wants to do is apply the high standards required for a conviction in a criminal court, even though they don't have the authority to impose the sanctions that a criminal court can use. So essentially, they want to stack the cards in favor of perpetrators. So they cannot impose the same sanctions. So the sanctions they can impose is you can't give kirtan, you can't occupy a position of authority. Essentially, you can say that the only sanctions they can impose are a suspension of privileges,
which
within
is
the society
a slapped
of ISKCON,
wrist.
which
It's a
is
slap.
it's nothing. It's not a okay. You can say it's not a punishment per se. It's not jail time, but they want to impose. They want to say, well, we don't have evidence beyond reasonable doubt, so this guy's free. And a lot of people also say, well, why don't you go to the police, as if the police is some kind of magic fix. Whereas in your case, the police actually arrested the guy, they got involved, you went through court, you went all the way to a jury, and then it doesn't happen. So when you have so the real question that ISKCON needs to acknowledge is, what do we do when we have a situation where somebody appears likely to pose a threat to children, to women, to the safety of the society in general, and we don't have, which is for most people, you're not going to have evidence beyond reasonable doubt. And then, of course, even when you do have evidence beyond reasonable doubt, as in the case of Tripakara comes to mind, then you have characters like Bhakti Vikas Swami, who is welcoming him at his temple, even though he's been convicted twice, I believe, definitely once for child abuse, but I think maybe twice. And then Bhakti Vikas Swami and even Lokanath Swami, they invite him to their temples to give class and present him as a trusted senior Vaishnava, which is, to me, that's so reckless. So anyway, I digress. Yeah. Back to you.
No, we want your inputs from time to time. I'm going to just read a couple of pieces of information that Fact Checker has brought to my attention. The allegations that Sapna's mentioned here that came from this individual's conduct in Mayapur. The only reason CPO couldn't move forward with them is CPO's jurisdiction is only for minors. So they did acknowledge that they seemed very, very real. Obviously, they earned bans from certain temples, but it wasn't something that CPO could add to their own investigation. There's a point you've just made, though, Sanako, which is this idea of risk assessment. I think that CPOC is potentially clueless. They might know something about law in general. I don't think they really know much about child protection. And we'll see later in this case where they're actively ignoring known risks or arguing that they shouldn't be known if the person committed offences before joining ISKCON, which makes absolutely no sense at all. Another little point here from our fact checker. While convictions have increased by 47-something% in 23-24, the number of reported rape cases, this is not even dated rape cases, aged rape cases, that leads to a conviction remains very low, often below 2 or 3% of reported crimes. So again, the police are not magic, and CPO is not an alternative. It is a complementary or supplementary service. Let's come back to you, Sapna. So when these restrictions were imposed and the CPO found in your favor that these things happened and that these what was the feeling like of feeling heard and knowing that these safeguards were in place?
Best feeling in the world.
Yeah.
It's like a weight had been lifted off me. I was free.
Yeah. And I gather that it was somewhat short-lived because it was maybe only a year or two later, maybe less, when, and no one even told you about this, you find yourself, this person who had been restricted is now back on the altar. What was that like to suddenly not even know what's gone on, except that the restrictions are not being followed. What was the experience like?
Oh, it was awful, absolutely awful. Like my
And
stomach sunk, and it was like, I don't want my daughter going to the temple anymore. My mum and dad stopped watching my Apple TV because they could see him all the time.
and so
It
you,
was it. The guy actually got a hero's welcome back in So Street Temple. They were like, "Oh,
yeah,
welcome back to our blah blah blah."
a big
It
cheer
was,
like a returning hero.
yeah, which is like, oh, it's wrong on so many levels.
Yeah, it's a little bit
I
beyond tone deaf.
can I'll add something else. Years before I went to the police, I actually went to the temple president at Soho, and him and another devotee came back to my mum's house, and my mum and dad can remember this as well. And I was trying to ban him from Soho Temple at that time, and my cousin who raped me had given Damodar Prabhu. No, sorry, not you. Sorry, I don't want to say names. Given the temple president a letter to apologize what he had done to me, but I refused to accept it and I refused to read it.
Yeah. But essentially was the TP at the time canvassing on his behalf? Oh, you should forgive him.
Yeah,
Was that they
yeah, because
logic?
he had senior authority in Soho Temple. He was higher up and he was very popular with the senior devotees.
Yeah. So you learn that his restrictions are either not being followed or maybe they've been lifted. And what happened? Did you reach out to this Child Protection Oversight Committee? And so what was the essence of your question or your message to them when you were sort of, what's happened here?
Yeah, I wanted to find out how his restrictions were overturned. What did they find out that the other team didn't find out? And why didn't they inform me? And if they had obviously receiving some emails from them, they'd obviously liaised with him. And he'd obviously said his side of the story that it was a two-way thing and stuff. But no one came and asked me exactly what happened. And the other thing they said was we weren't at the temple at the time. Yes, we were. We were doing service. My mum and dad started going to the temple years ago and brought his mum and dad and his family to the temple.
So you wrote all of these. Why didn't you communicate with me? What has changed? How is it you've even reopened a case which goes against even their own stated position? I'm just having a look at something our fact checker has provided. The CPOC found that the case was taken up without proper jurisdiction. So we'll come to this in a moment, as the events in question occurred outside of ISKCON's institutional scope at a time when both are minors and not affiliated with ISKCON. Okay, I'm going to break this into a few pieces. So there's a lot of errors. This is how the CPOC articulated their reasons. They're saying the case that the CPO looked into didn't follow the 2023 guidelines. Now, this has been interesting because your case was considered in what year? 2024?
I think so.
Now, at that time, the 2023 guidelines, which is what CPOC is calling them, had not manifest. Whether they'd started looking at them, and not even sure why they're called the CPO, why they're called the 2023 guidelines, because they weren't released until 2025. In fact, they were released simultaneously with the overturning of this decision, or within days, like for all intents and purposes, simultaneously. And the case that the CPO, when they looked at your case, they were following the 2018 guidelines, which at the time were the up-to-date guidelines. Now, the only reason this matters is that one change in the 2023, aka 2025 guidelines after the fact, was that we're only going to look into cases where both of the people were minors involved, and where the person was a minor involved with this at the time, and the other guy was a a serving member of ISKCON at the time, and so on. Now, apparently, without talking to you, they've taken the abuser's word for it, or the alleged abuser's word for it. Oh, no, we weren't even members of ISKCON at the time. You've already told us, well, it's from the late 80s onwards that we were all involved in the society. So they've essentially taken a biased point of view that was non-factual, treated it as a fact, and used it to completely overturn a case. Now, the other thing that becomes really interesting is this case, it wasn't meant to be an appeal, because apparently they weren't going to look into appeals. So they called it
Procedural review.
A procedural review. This is very interesting. Now, the reason I'm bringing that out is they have decided to retroactively apply these new guidelines to a case that was already finished and had already had an appeal that was not settled in the appellant's favor. And they've decided, without even looking at the evidence, because they didn't have it, to just take this guy's word for it. Now, the other thing that's interesting is that decision to overturn was made just as the new guidelines are being released. So this is a big question, I think, for CPOC. Did the appellant get a heads up? And was he told or coached that this is how to, were these new guidelines, which don't make sense to us, were these invented purely to get this guy off scot-free? Because it just, the other thing that we learned from CPOC is that the GBC Executive Committee directed them to look at the case. Ooh, hang on. The GBC told everybody, they even had a resolution, we're not going to interfere anymore. Why are they now telling somebody to look at this case? Why are they applying retroactively principles that they literally just came up with? At the same time, this guy seems to have privileged knowledge of them. There's definitely some questions to answer here, CPOC, about how this all came about.
But even the idea that if you're a perpetrator and you abused children before you joined ISKCON, that is not under the jurisdiction of the Child Protection Office. It's not just ludicrous and insane, it's reckless. It's you're saying if you are a serial child abuser and then you join ISKCON, we don't care. We're not going to even consider the fact that you are a high risk. You pose a high risk to our children. That's not our jurisdiction. We're not worried about that. You're welcome. You get a clean slate because you, whatever you did it before you joined. I mean, whoever passed that amendment to the child protection guidelines, I don't know. It's like, I don't know what they were thinking.
Well, it's another question for CPOC. Can you explain the intent of this? Because as you've said, I mean, someone put it quite a humorous way the other day. If Jeffrey Dahmer joins the organization, apparently he's fine because he only ate people prior to joining.
Exactly. But what I would like to ask Sapna, if you would, could you explain, like, if you want to share, could you explain what it felt like going through the bureaucratic runaround that they put you through because I know you contacted Champa Kalata, the CPO. Maybe you were also in contact with Govinda Lilamrita from CPOC. They kind of bounced you around a little bit from what I remember. Could you explain as a survivor, victim of child abuse, going through that process, what did it feel like? What was how helpful did you find them? How unhelpful did you find them? What was your experience?
It was awful. I felt like I was pushed around, ignored, like I didn't matter at all. And it felt like the person who assaulted me, he was obviously more important to them. I didn't get my answers. I got fobbed off and stuff, and it just felt awful. I felt like I was so trapped and I couldn't find a way out, and I couldn't get the answers I wanted to and understand why these restrictions were lifted.
Some of the
I
most
think it-
shocking. Sorry, go ahead, Sanika.
No, I think it's really interesting what you're sharing, Sapna, when you say that the perpetrator, you felt that the perpetrator mattered more than you. So here we have the Child Protection Office, we have the Child Protection Oversight Committee, who are supposedly they came in to ensure due process and this, that, and all kinds of other stuff. And then here we hear from you, I felt that the perpetrator mattered more than me. And I think anybody who any objective observer who study your case is going to conclude that they offered more protection to the perpetrator than they did to you. That's, to me, that's I don't see how any objective observer could read your story and come to any conclusion that is different from that. And to me, that is so sad for sure, but also so alarming.
Well, apart from the dubious timing of all of this, the backdating of these conveniently worded new loopholes, the most shocking thing I saw in the response that Sapna received was when you asked the question, why didn't you even reach out to me? Why didn't you find out from me when we joined the movement, or at least let me know there was a review going on? You were essentially told, A, we didn't feel like we needed to. The guidelines that we wrote are silent on that, and we just didn't decide it was particularly important to let you know or to find out anything from you. I think they also acknowledged that they didn't doubt any of what you've reported, that it took place. It was just out of jurisdiction. And in fact, I think they even confessed that they never even looked at your case file so they actually made a blind decision to let somebody off the hook who clearly has a track record of pestering and crossing the line and assaulting, and on his say-so, give him a loophole and reinstate. I mean, I don't know if there's much more complexity to it. I'll just finish off what the fact checker sent through a little while ago. In view of these findings, all restrictions, requirements, and recommendations previously imposed upon you, this is the abuser, are hereby vacated and lifted in full. They're definitely thinking they're doing a public service in that little statement. I would also like to draw to your attention that such a review decision does not trigger the broader distribution requirements that led to the review panel decisions. In fact, the guidelines is silent in this regard, and I sent it to the petitioner only. So the fact that they've called him a petitioner, he's had his final review, it was rejected, but he's gone back, and the GBC EC, they need to answer for this. The GBC EC directed CPOC and the Ministry of Justice to look at this case, which they obediently did and found in favor of the petitioner. So who is he petitioning? Who received that new appeal? And on what basis was it decided to get CPOC to overturn this decision? I know there was a lot else that you asked of them. You actually sort of asked them about your data, and there's a bunch of other questions that you asked them, Sapna. Anything else from your perspective that you just expected to be different and reasonably expect to be different as someone who's gone through this atrocious experience like you have? What else about this surprised you? Maybe we've covered it off.
Yeah, I don't know what else to say.
Where does it leave you now?
Hanging.
Right. So you've gone from feeling like finally this thing has been resolved,
Yeah.
to it's all up in the air again. And I think you told us earlier, you don't feel safe taking your daughter to Soho Street. What do you think this signals in terms of the child protection agenda right now in the society?
I don't even know what to say to that. Like, on a personal note, I got to a point after he lost the appeal and stuff, I felt free and I felt confident and I felt like me. And when CPOC did what they did and lifted all the restrictions, I feel if I go to the temple, like he's laughing at me and he could look at me in such a disgusting way, and I just don't feel safe.
And is it now a closed case, or is there still a sense that dialogue or exchanges are going back and forth, or do you get the sense that CPOC have just, that's it, it's done?
Yep, that's exactly what I think.
How would you describe the communication you had with both CPOC and Champakalata? Were they helpful? Were they at least communicative? Were they, how would you, if you had to give them a Google review, what would it say?
Awful, absolutely awful. You feel ignored. You feel like they don't want to respond. They send you emails like it was like after chasing and chasing and chasing. You don't know whether they've received it or read it, ignored it, and then they send you ad hoc emails. And yeah, no, it was awful. It was absolutely awful. You just feel like you're not important at all.
You
And
wrote to the GBC.
they just want to, you know, delete the emails and just move on. That's what you feel like. But it was because I was chasing and chasing and chasing. I feel sorry for people if this ever happened again, and then they ask for answers and then they don't get the answers. They don't chase, whereas I'm chasing now. I'm chasing for answers and I'm chasing for why. And I refuse to give up. Whereas other people would give up.
What I find particularly alarming about your case is that you are a capable adult woman. You're very determined. You're articulate. You're persistent. And you used words like, I felt like they were fobbing me off. They brushed me off. It's kind of like their intention was, you're a disturbance, you're a nuisance, and they're just trying to,
Make me go away.
How do we make this go away? So what I find really alarming about what your case shows and says is that, what would these people do if today they find out that a prominent ISKCON high profile personality is abusing children? Try to see how somebody who doesn't have your agency, who doesn't have your ability to speak, they would like, if they applied the same standard they applied to you to a child that reached out, somehow managed to reach out and ask for their help, the child would be like steamrolled by these people.
Yeah.
To me, that's it just shows how incompetent and unsuited this body is to protect children, and how their agenda is completely something else. What I am beginning to see more and more, it feels like it's like I'm kind of preparing for the hit to come. Is I believe that your case was just a test run, meaning that the man that assaulted you, he is not on the level of some. I wouldn't. He's not one of the higher profile perpetrators that we have in ISKCON. He's a lesser known person. He's known in So Street, but he's not like a guru. He's not a GBC. But what I think they did was a test run, and what they're actually planning to do is to
more procedural reviews.
Do procedural reviews for Damodar Swami, Lakshmi Moni, possibly even Bhaktividya Purna. There is definitely people like Shivaram Swami who's pushing for Bhaktividya Purna to be forgiven and rehabilitated. There is a lot of people pushing for Lakshmi Moni to be exonerated, and certainly Damodar. He has a lot of supporters still. And I just think that this was just a test run and see, okay, this is how we do it. And then now we bring in the people we really wanted to bring in. And wow.
Yeah.
Another thing about your case, Sapna, is which I think it's important to mention is that the family, I think maybe the perpetrator himself or his family, they gave a substantial amount of money to the Seoul Street Temple, and it's always it's hard to think that that did not influence the decision of the temple president to it's like, well, they're
I
big
believe so.
donors. Yeah.
I believe so.
Yes, it's almost an acceptable collateral damage. Well, we've got these high-performing people, and it's a shame that we lose a few people on the way, but,
Cost of
it's a
doing
price we're
business.
willing to pay. Sapna, I gather you also wrote to the GBC themselves and didn't exactly get a whole load of responses. I saw a couple. One was, hey, you should go and talk to, what's that? Conciliatory
ISKCON
service that we have.
ISKCON review
ISKCON
resolve.
Resolve. You should go and talk to them, which was interesting. And then I think someone wrote saying, I really don't like all this child protection stuff, but I want to let you know that I have received your message. Wow. Thank you for the wonderful outpouring of empathy. Sapna, I think you're extraordinarily courageous, and thank you for sharing your story, because I do think, Prabhupada gives that example of test 1 grain of rice. And the experience that you had, we wouldn't wish that on anybody. Not even just the experience, obviously, of the abuse, but then the horrendous handling of your case. And just CPOC, if you are watching, or if anyone wants to let them know, there's a load of questions here. How did this new appeal, because you called the person the petitioner, so obviously they've petitioned. Why was that entertained in spite of your undertakings to not review old cases, not retroactively apply your criteria? Yeah, so there's a question. The timing is very suspicious. These backdated 2023 new guidelines, which provide the loophole, coming out more or less simultaneously. There's no way that when Sapna's case was being heard by CPO that they could have possibly applied the 2023 guidelines, because they weren't released yet. Why are they even called the 2023 guidelines? Was that purely to make it seem like they'd been in place earlier? That would be the most obvious Occam's razor reading of it. And then we've got questions about, well, help us understand this new clause. How is it serving the interest of protecting children to say, we don't even see the offences a person committed prior to joining ISKCON? In this case, you appear to have taken the word of the alleged abuser and not even sought to cross-check it anywhere. You didn't contact the victim to even let them know this case was being overturned or reviewed or whatever. You never got hold of the case file. Yeah, I know you want to get all that crappy about someone didn't give it to you, but you still went ahead and still did it. And yeah, why would you tell the victim you just didn't even think it was important that they were even aware of any of these things? How do you defend any of these actions? I worry that things like due process were legally necessary at a time where law was possibly being carried out in a more cavalier fashion. Oh, hang on. Maybe some innocent people are being locked up here. Let's have some due process to make sure that we give a guarantee someone is innocent till proven guilty, and we go through a certain process. Is there no equivalent? What's the right protocol for dealing with the victim? Or is it just we're going to be super kind and make sure we don't do anything that could possibly be at all unfair to a criminal or an accused criminal? Something not right about how victims are being treated under the CPOC. And if this is the new generation of child protection, it's a horrendous backstep. I don't think the case was made that the previous CPO was in violation of any due process. Maybe there was rhetoric about it. What we're now seeing is absolutely indefensible. And I know that the GBC labors under the illusion of we are the supreme poobahs of everything, unaccountable managerial authority, supremo. I forget all the words now.
Ultimate managerial
The
authority.
ultimate. We are the ultimate managing authority. I don't think that actually means that you're not accountable. In fact, you're about to experience quite a lot of public accountability for making these dodgy decisions and putting people like Sapna in harm's way. Sorry, Sanaka.
No, beginning of 2025, the CPO, the GBC basically did a hostile takeover of the Child Protection Office, even though they said they wouldn't get involved. They appointed Champakalata as an interim child protection director, which she was going to be there for 6 months or 9 months or something. The CPOC itself was on a trial period, which was supposed to be reviewed at the meetings that we just had.
Which didn't happen.
There was no review of CPOC. Champakalata, there was no talk of like who is the new child protection director, or have they extended There was nothing whatsoever, any of that. Sapna, I wanted to ask you, roughly, how many emails do you have outstanding? Meaning the emails that you've sent out requesting clarifications from the GBC, from CPOC, from Champakalata that are up in the air waiting. They're kind of being ignored. They kind of like gone in the forget, nothing, ignore and avoid. Do you have an idea?
Lots of emails. Fact checker knows. Might want to help me out here.
What would have been like if you could imagine something that would have how do you imagine they could have handled it so that you would have felt at least that you had been heard, that you had not been your side had been considered, that you had that you mattered? Like,
well,
what do you imagine that would have looked like?
Completely different. I sent an email to ask what happened, why is he at the temple, I've just seen him, etc., etc. They could have reached out, they could have emailed me, but I had to chase, and then I was getting patronizing emails coming back to me. Had they responded and said, right, we looked into this and we did this and this and made me feel heard, it would have been completely different.
And we will post quite a lot of these artifacts in the subsequent chat threads. Something else from our fact checker, and I'm very mindful that, we need to wrap up very shortly. You received a fairly strong message about needing to be confidential, as if somehow or other we need all this we need nobody here to screams. It's not sure whose interest that's really protecting. I think there's part of what go ahead.
It felt like they were threatening me not to speak to anybody or tell anybody. They were trying to shut me up, and I wasn't allowed to talk, otherwise I'll be in trouble. But it's my case, so I can do what I like.
Yeah. No, well, but it's mind-blowing that they would go to that to threaten the victim. They go,
and that was a number of emails. They said that to me. It wasn't just one. They repeatedly said the same thing.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it does sort of heighten the fact that clueless actually about what child protection entails. They do seem to be heavily aligned to the rights of the accused and oblivious to anybody else's needs or interests.
I think who was it that said that if you don't know the intention of someone, look at the outcomes and assume their motive. Yeah. So if you look at the outcome of Sapna's case, the motive was clearly not child protection. It wasn't because they disregarded. They did a procedural review. Every point that they mention in as grounds to justify their review is not valid. So first of all, you were part of ISKCON when the incident happened. Your parents joined before that, because I think your parents got initiated in the late 80s and the abuse took place in the early 90s. So you're clearly in ISKCON for a few years already. Also, the idea that something that happened prior to someone joining ISKCON is not under the jurisdiction of child protection, that's reckless and dangerous. And it's clear that child protection is not the priority.
Yeah.
And then I think, to add insult to injury, they even what's the word? Characterized what happened as
teenage adventurous experimentation.
Curiosity, sexual exploration, curiosity between two teenagers. That is, oh my God. So you were raped, and here you have the Child Protection Office and the Child Protection Oversight Committee saying, well, that was just teenage curiosity. Kids. It's kids
No.
just exploring.
It was grooming and then went to rape. That's what I know. That's what happened.
I'm very mindful that your work day is kicking off and everything, Sapna. I'm incredibly grateful. It's taken enormous courage, given what you've been through and given these threats, to have not have just kind of gone away and sobbed in a corner, but actually to stand and tell your story. And we're going to make sure the story goes far and wide. And I expect that this will be, one of a series where, in fact, we're asking people to respond, and we're going to ask leaders in particular, what do you think about this? I don't think the GBC can avoid responsibility if this is what they've decided they want their child protection to look like. I think they absolutely need to face some music. Certainly the Child Protection Oversight Committee, Minister of Justice, absolutely have many questions to answer here. But the fact that you've courageously stood, and despite all the hurt and despite how uncomfortable it must feel, the fact that you've patiently told your story, I think you just have such an enormous character, Sapna. I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think there's too much else to say at this point. I think we will be carrying Sapna's story for a little bit of a while now. Sapna, you will be absolutely welcome to join any of the subsequent calls if you wish to, completely at your your own call, your own discretion. But thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for bravely just sharing everything, including all of the hurt that you've experienced. True respect to you.
I propose putting out an open invitation to Champakalata, CPOC,
sure.
ISKCON's legal counsel,
for sure,
and this GBC executive committee, all the people that are have unanswered emails from Sapna, to come here and explain themselves. That would be a good start for. But I mean, I doubt that anybody will show up, but the invitation is there.
Yeah, well, their silence, given that they have had an opportunity to speak, which is more than they offered Sapna in this case, their silence will also be very, very loud. I would imagine that if I'd personally been involved in such a dog's breakfast, I would wish to actually make amends, clarify, sort things out. Hiding away in some, I don't know, ivory tower or whatever, I don't think that helps the case at all.
I think the problem is assuming that child protection is their intention, because their actions clearly say otherwise.
Well, and this is the thing about accountability. Even if you have a will with Srila Prabhupada saying those words, it doesn't actually mean you're never accountable to anyone for anything ever. It actually simply means that the buck stops with you. There's nobody that you can pass the buck to. So when a disaster like this happens on your watch, you're on point. It doesn't mean we never have to answer to anybody, because you will be answering. You'll be answering to the whole community as this story gets more and more well known, because it's indefensible. All right, enough for now. Sapna, thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Sapna. Thank you. Really.
Thank you
so
very much.
Sanika, thank you for joining. Fact Checker, thank you so much for being on point. I'll end the meeting now. Obviously, feel free to stay around a little. If you're watching on Vedic Inquirer, please share this. We want lots of people to know Sapna's story, and we want the leaders to have to answer for this kind of nastiness.
Yep, I want
Hare
answers.
Hare Krishna.
Okay.